Christ Teacheth Humility by Robert Scott Lauder has been on long-term loan for many decades now to Respite Home Lukey House, so hasn't received any treatment. The plan was to clean the painting to improve its overall appearance. In tandem with the conservation treatment is a very detailed examination of how the painting has been made, and for that we're using a whole battery of investigative techniques just to give us a very holistic view of how the painting came to be.
We were very keen to give visitors to the National Gallery the opportunity to see this wonderful painting and to make up their own minds about the first modern Scottish artwork that was bought for the building in the mid-19th century. We've got a number of paintings by Robert Scott Lauder at the galleries. He was known as a portrait painter, and also he painted literary subject matters, so stories of Walter Scott, and in all of them there is usually some passage of absolutely incandescently beautiful colour. The Houses of Parliament burnt down, and as part of the process of rebuilding there was the opportunity in a sense to think about how it might be decorated, and with the great confidence that the Victorians had, they sort of established a parliamentary commission and had competitions and issued a theme, and they, as I said, wanted really important works of art, so they gave quite tight parameters in which the subject matter, the type of painting it should be. For an artist such as Robert Scott Lauder, and that was a great opportunity because, particularly coming originally from Scotland, there was very little demand for large, what we called history paintings, large important paintings, which were often seen as the pinnacle of an artist's endeavour. The path that Robert Scott Lauder chose to take was a very painterly one, using oil paint, something that he'd become very excited about when he went to Italy in the 1830s.
How he was trying to match his 19th century palette with portable XRF. X-ray fluorescence is a means of identifying the range of pigments used by the artist. XRF identifies the inorganic, heavier elements within the paint. And you can see the quality, the difference in the quality of the evidence from XRF has demonstrated that the artist used a combination of very traditional pigments, such as azurite and vermilion, lead white, with more 19th century, newer chrome and cadmium containing pigments. So that's really interesting. Infrared looks at a very specific area of the electromagnetic spectrum, invisible wavelength to the human eye, and that's what allows it to penetrate the paint layers, and then we are able to see the carbon-containing underpainting. What's interesting is that there definitely seems to have been an earlier plan to create some sort of tower or interior in the background, and that's been a major alteration to create this sort of fortress. The walls of Jerusalem, I think. Beautiful bit of painting there of the cane with the knobbly bits from the growth. Also these small dashes which denote the form of his headgear. That's all very suggestive of it coming from a prepared cartoon, I suspect, for that figure. But then again, we've got this very clear adjustment in his eye. Well, we intend with varnish removal to expose the original hand of the artist. We don't want a cloudy, degraded layer. There's no rubbing involved. Basically, I'm allowing the solvent to dissolve the underlying layer, confident in the knowledge that it's not going to affect the paint. Varnish removal is very visual. We can see instantly on the cotton wool how discoloured the varnish is and what an effect it has had. This is particularly evident on the lighter areas, the hands and the face, and these areas have less varnish than the darker areas as the painting's been partially and selectively cleaned. And we can see the brushworks beginning to emerge, very lively. You can see the edge of the brush stroke just coming up over the edge of his beard. We can see what a difference removing the discoloured layer. Varnish is very necessary to protect the paint layer, but also to saturate the colours. Without it, the surface is very dull and matte. And so when it ages, oxidises, discolours, it loses its transparency, which is pretty key to making the paint film sing in a way. I have a good idea of the pigments he used, and while I'm not trying to replicate them, I'm looking for something that will be pretty close. It's not just the colour, but also the transparency or the opacity of the pigment mixture is really important in this case. I have a palette for primarily opaque colours, and I have ochres here, a titanium white, we obviously don't use lead white these days, vermilion, a little bit of ultramarine, some Prussian blue. And then I have this transparent glazy palette where we have alizarin crimson, Indian yellow, ivory black, viridian. They're designed to be readily soluble and entirely reversible.
One of the reasons Robert Scott Lauder is such a great colourist is that he used layers of glazes of colour. And layers of glazes of colour are very fragile, and you have to be very careful. If you're removing varnish, the varnish was discoloured, we could see that, but it's very difficult to take off a top layer of a painting with lots of glazes without removing the colour. So Leslie was always very, very, very cautious about how much of an impact the conservation project would have. In a way, we've always seen this as, because of the nature of a conservator's work, especially someone like Leslie, who's got an amazing historical understanding, that we would learn by, in a sense, refreshing the painting, making it ready again to be presented in a national gallery.
So the painting as we see it today looks a little bit different. In 1849, after it had come to the National Galleries of Scotland, it was noted that the colours had fallen in slightly, and Lauder came in to restore the painting himself, and we believe it was at that time that the composition was widened slightly at the top, so it went from being a semicircle shape to being more of an arch, a theatrical arch. And you can see now that there's a colour difference where that extension happened. We are lucky enough to have a really beautiful watercolour of the water carrier, Small Boy, is very finely realised and has been transferred into final composition.
We kept the frame, which I suppose in the 60s and 70s would have just been seen as anathema, horrible, chunky things, but they're actually beautifully made.
You can see how dirty it was. I mean, obviously that's night and day, but it's not until you really start to make progress and you have that contrast that you go, wow, it's not been on the painting for a very long time. The frame is much larger than the painting because there's a missing piece, which will be the slip frame, the inner frame, and that bridges the gap, and we will be remaking that from scratch. So it's not just restoring the frame, we then get to make a replica slip to bring the two back together, which is going to be a really lovely moment. Paintings that come through the studio and you take them out of their frame and they lose nothing, seeing them bare on the ledge or on an easel like that, they're still incredible pieces. They lose nothing when they're out of their sort of their grandeur of the big gold frame. But I always love getting the frame back on. I think it's like reuniting.
From the very beginning, we knew that whatever frame conservators or Leslie did, that we would learn a lot about the painting and the way it was made, and that in a way is as much of a bonus. It's actually getting that opportunity to think about the techniques that a mid-19th century artist used to create a painting.